Well, good afternoon. It's Angela Coggins again, and here I am talking about another mindful moment. This is our fifth one, and I thought it might be a good thing to actually summarise the other four where we've got to so far, so we can build on some of the things that we've explored together. Um, we looked at things like how our breathing is important, how our breathing helps anchor us into the present moment. We've looked at taking a different view to help us on our journey. We may be on the same course, we may be trying to navigate the same difficult things, but sometimes if we choose to look more at the positives attached to things rather than the negatives, it does really help out and improve our well-being and help us to build up our resilience and cope for the more trying times ahead. We've also looked at another important side of mindfulness, which is about paying kind attention to ourselves. Often we're very good at looking out for other people, but it's really important, especially at this time, to be aware that we need to be looked after ourselves as well. And so be kind to ourselves. And some of that might crop up again later on in this particular talk. I had a conversation recently with a lady and we were just checking in with each other how we were getting on. And she says, well, she says, I've had some ups and downs, some good days, some bad days, which seems to be very familiar with most people I've talked to, that sometimes things seem to be going okay and then we have these dips. And part of today's session really is to explore the way that our brain is wired and how we can actually do something about some of these downtimes that we may have, just to help us understand where some of these thoughts are coming from and to help us notice them, really. We've probably all come across this where you might be wearing something that you're a bit feeling a bit you feel a bit nervous about because you've not tried this particular colour. So it might be, well, I'm wearing this blue top, I've not worn this colour before, I'm not quite sure if it suits me or not. And you go into a room and 9 people say, oh, Angela, that's a fantastic colour on you, it's a really nice colour. Oh, it highlights your eyes, or it makes your skin colour look good. Or they might just say, oh, you look nice. And then one person might just say, don't think that blue's very good for you. And although they are only one person out of the 10, guess which is the thought that will lodge itself up there? It's going to be that one, isn't it? We often hone in on the negative thoughts, and that's part of a process called cognitive distortion, or sometimes we might relabel it, it's an unhelpful mental attitude, or some people call them negative automatic thoughts. And part of mindfulness, which I think is really exciting and really interesting, is actually helping us become aware of the range of these automatic negative thoughts, these unhelpful mental attitudes. And as soon as we start to spot them in our trains of thought as we're just thinking, we're able to think, oh, that's interesting. And just taking that step back will help us become aware of actually that this is an automatic thought, and really perhaps it's not one we need to continue with. Because you know what it's like, sometimes we get a thought and then we overanalyse and we worry and we travel down all these little pathways, and eventually we end in a place where we really have put ourselves down. And sometimes it can only just be a look, sometimes it can just be particular instance, and it reminds you of things that perhaps in your past have been very difficult. So today's session is really looking at how we can use mindfulness to help us with our disturbing or difficult or unhelpful thoughts, really. Now, there was a really famous proverb, and I've spent ages trying to work out where it's come from. And some people say it's a Chinese proverb, some people it's a Russian proverb, but most people seem to think that it's from Martin Luther, the Reformation priest from the 1500s from Germany. And he had this brilliant quote, which I think was really helpful, helps us understand these thoughts, where they come from, and what we can do about them. And he says, "You cannot prevent the birds of sorrow from flying over your head, but you can prevent them from building nests in your hair." So let's have a think about this. You can't prevent some of these thoughts entering into our heads. We can't stop them. But what we do with them can really influence how they affect us. Because we are, as we all know, what we think has a massive impact on our behaviour. Now let's get some more, perhaps some examples of what I'm trying to explore here. I was talking to one particular lady, and she said, "I find it really hard making friends sometimes." She said, I said, "Oh, that's interesting." And when we started talking about these negative thoughts, it was like the penny dropped. She said, "Oh, that's what I do." And I did an example where I said, perhaps you're in a room, and there's this lady that this friend, potential friend, if you like, might be coming in, and you just get this sudden pain, and you're thinking, that was a bit sore, that stomach, or it might be a twinge, or you might have been running and you might have twinged something, and your facial expression might just be, "Oh," or and that person's looking at you, and what might be running through her mind might be, "Oh, she looks like she doesn't like me. I wonder what I've done. Have I done anything to upset her? Well, if she's not going to like me, I'm not going to like her." And so their response, their thoughts influence their behaviour. And so whereas you might think, "Oh, I'll go and have a chat with her," the facial expression she might have on might be, And so you might think, "Well, she don't seem to like me. Well, I'm not going to like her then." And then it just sort of self-perpetuates, when initially what it really was just a response to some physical reaction within your body, or that person had completely misinterpreted the signals that you were giving. And when we were discussing this woman said, she says, "I do that all the time." She says, "I didn't realise." And she says, "Oh, perhaps that's why people, she finds it hard making friends, really." So that was quite interesting. So sometimes we have our down days, and like we've mentioned earlier about, sometimes we'll be on the same journey, but we'll be looking at one particular view, which is dark, foreboding, negative, things are going wrong. And we need to sometimes physically, or intentionally rather, make the effort to turn our attention and actually look for the positives, and see how we can help ourselves. So these negative automatic thoughts. Mark Williams, who I've mentioned before, who's one of the great gurus in mindfulness, Professor Mark Williams, based at Oxford, and the mindfulness organisation there. And he, I think it was Mark Williams, identified 15 different types of unhelpful mental attitudes, or these cognitive distortions. And one of the activities we can do is we can look through them all and just see which sort of resonate with yourselves, and think, "Oh, I do that. Oh, I wonder if that means that provokes this kind of reaction," or well, "that's how I think about myself," and then I start to feel worse. So I've got one or two prepared. Okay, this is the one that I mentioned already, and it's called disqualifying the positive, where you find it hard to accept praise. So you put down your successes. So you find it hard to say, "Oh, that blue looks nice on you, Angela." And you go with the person that actually says, "No, I don't think it goes with you, Angela. I don't think that's a nice colour," or "You don't look that great." So something about, we disqualify sometimes the positives that we should really be celebrating. And it's not about being big-headed, or "Who do you think you are, Lady Jane," or that kind of boasting. It's actually just rationally and realistically and practically acknowledging things that you can do well. And sometimes that can be an unhelpful way of assessing ourselves. And one of the things which I know I'm quite prone to, and I've been exploring this actually with the whole lockdown coronavirus, what's happening to the world kind of situation that we're in, and that's a catastrophizing thought. And sometimes when we're feeling particularly low, these thoughts can start to mound up, and they can really, really pull us down. And the catastrophizing thought is when you experience an event or a situation as it's really uncomfortable, and you just blow it out of all proportion. So we have the lockdown, and I'm already several sort of scenarios ahead of the worst case things that could happen. And so catastrophizing sometimes, we just don't, it is not helpful at all. It takes us out of the present moment, and so we start looking into the future of things that we have no control over, so therefore it's really unhelpful. And Jesus had some great words to say about dealing with the day's events already. I think Matthew 6, I don't know if I mentioned this one already. It's one of my favourites actually, and I think it's great for mindfulness, that Jesus knew exactly where we were going with this. And so where are we? There we are. Matthew 6 verses 25. This is Jesus speaking. Therefore, I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, what you will drink, or about your body and what you will wear. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not more valuable than they? And this is for me is the key verse. And can any of you, by worrying, add a single hour to the span of your life? Why do you worry about clothing? Consider the lilies in the field, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. And yet I tell you, neither Solomon in all his glory was not clothed like one of these. And then he goes on to say, therefore do not worry, saying, what will we eat, what will we drink? But strive first for the kingdom of God and his righteousness. And then he finally finishes with, so do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will bring worries of its own. Today's trouble is enough for today. So that idea of living your life in the future, of which most of the time we have no control over at the moment. So looking at today and getting through today, and I think sometimes when things are very difficult, that's a great thing to remember. So there are a few of the automatic thoughts. As I said, there's about 15. Lots of examples we can give for them. And I'd just like to finish really, because obviously we're just touching on some of these issues, about what we can do to help ourselves with these automatic thoughts. We can't stop them just jumping, just coming into our heads, but we can decide what we're going to do about them. And mindfulness, as we looked at with paying kind attention to ourselves, is not judging ourselves, thinking, oh, I'm useless, I keep thinking these things all the time. That's a very judgmental attitude, isn't it? So it's perhaps more helpful to think, that's interesting. Watching that particular news programme makes me feel really sad afterwards. So perhaps I won't watch that one at that time of the day. I'll watch it early in the day when I feel I can cope better with things. Or it might be sometimes things are quite difficult and I'm feeling really inadequate or whatever, and you just be kind to yourself and say, well, that's normal. Everybody's going to be feeling like this. These are unusual and difficult times. And think about the times when you have got through things and you have been able to cope with really difficult situations. And so think on those things. And so I'll just leave you with this lovely phrase from Paul's letter to the Romans, which I think is really interesting. I'd like to really delve into it a bit more, really. And he says, chapter 12, verse 2, do not be conformed by this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds, so that you may discern the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. So very similar to the letter of Philippians that we looked at the other time, about thinking on the positive, thinking about what's good, not worrying too much about tomorrow, but just getting through today. So we'll leave it here, and we'll follow up some of these things about how our brain is wired and how we automatically go into these sort of thought processes at another time. But all the best, and speak to you soon.